What would you say if I told you that truth has no intrinsic value, that it is in fact just a tool, and that this knowledge is necessary in order to understand why fake news have taken over the world in the manner which they have in recent years, if in fact they hadn't done so for much longer? Furthermore, a big part of why fake news work could be understood if we look at one of Donald Trump's favorite tactics, which he took from grade schoolers: the power of imagery. Let's talk about it. But before we do, we have two other matters to discuss. First, like and subscribe to the channel. My lowly goal is to change the world, or try to do so through this channel. So liking and subscribing will help this channel and this video reach a wider audience and help me in achieving my goal. Second, we need to go over the rules of engagement shortly. If you wish to see me go over the rules in more details, there will be a link in the description of this video. 1. Watch the segment to the end. 2. Comparisons don't mean I find things equal. 3. Not all arguments are intended to be equally good. 4. I am not trying to convince you. 5. Assume what I say unsourced is preceded by I think or in my opinion. 6. Most questions aren't rhetorical. You are also welcome to pause the video and read the description in more details. And finally, this slide and my reading of it must appear when you are reacting to or showing an argument from my videos. Context matters, and this slide helps remind people of that. Let us begin with a matter of truth. I said that truth has no inherent value. It is not an ideal to strive for. Ideals such as beauty, supposedly, justice, are concepts that we should strive for their own good, regardless of whether or not we gain anything by it. I say that truth is a tool. Furthermore, a tool has no inherent value. Its value depends on what you can use it for and where and when. For instance, a hammer might not be the most useful tool if you are dying of thirst in the desert. A fire isn't going to help you if you are stuck on the surface of the sun. So, in order to understand the value of truth, we must first begin by looking at what it is that truth helps us achieve. And that takes us back to Plato. In his epistemological formulation, Plato claimed that knowledge is justified through belief. That is to say, if we want to say that someone knows something, we must have a belief or an observation that they have a justification to, and it turns out to be true. So truth is a requisite part of knowledge. But let's take a look at the last decade, let's say. There are those who would wish to claim that we don't know things because it serves them to claim that, because the knowledge that others claim goes against their objectives. For instance, we can look back on the topic of cigarette smoking. The big tobacco companies didn't want to admit that tobacco is harmful to people. One way to do it is to attack the facts. If we can agree that something is not a fact, such as tobacco harming people who smoke it, then that's one way to do it. Another, more radical approach is to try and undermine the concept of truth as a whole. Because if we can't know anything, and we also can't know that tobacco is harmful to people, and if we don't know that, why should we penalize the big tobacco companies? In more recent years, the two hot topic issues regarding to truth would have been COVID-19 and climate change. You can see how people who have vested financial interest in fossil fuel would benefit from undermining the concept of truth as a whole. Furthermore, politics as a whole. Truth allows us to communicate with one another. It provides us with a joint foundation which we can use to communicate. But if we don't agree on anything, we can't communicate. For instance, I once took a philosophy course on the concept of rational disagreement. Rational disagreements require both sides to agree on the facts and then still disagree on what you can infer from them in matters that do not relate to matters of personal belief. For instance, if you and I disagree on whether a fetus develops consciousness in the 6th week or in the 22nd week, then naturally we would disagree on whether an abortion is murder or not. But assuming there is a truth, if we know it, we can reach an agreement on whether it is or not, in fact, murder, for instance. Even day-to-day matters of finance or economy, if there is truth in whether social welfare helps people or only allows them to continue being unproductive, then the truth allows us to meet together and go from there about whether or not we should enhance social welfare, continue it as it is, or perhaps abolish it. So truth is quite valuable if you care about knowledge, or if you want to talk to other people and reach agreement. But some people in politics benefit from there being a clash between the two sides, in there being disagreement and discord, because that keeps people embattled, angry, and easier to manipulate. So if that is your goal, truth not only isn't valuable to you, but it is indeed an obstruction to your goals. And in denying the validity of truth, or in making people disbelieve in truth, you can reach your goals better. And the same happens to be true if knowledge runs counter to your goals. In tearing down truth, you can tear down knowledge, and thus falsehood becomes your tool and helps you reach your goals. So truth is in fact a tool, not an ideal, and some people have correctly identified that not only is truth not helping them further their goals, but is in fact an obstacle. And in having identified it, they have begun tearing down truth as not only as an ideal, but as a concept, as a tool that others can rely on. And that brings us naturally to fake news, also known as falsehoods. Why is fake news so powerful? Why is it so successful in convincing people? Many of the answers turn to psychologism, to reasons that depend on the psychology of people. But I think that these answers are quite weak because they depend on the particular person. For instance, let's say demagoguery. Let's say that fake news, instead of relying on facts, relies on an appeal to emotions. But an appeal to emotions, while it doesn't have to rely on truth, can also be true. Demagoguery doesn't have to rely on falsehoods. I guess it is true that I'm sorry, but we have to use the word truth sometimes. I guess it is true that it isn't a question of whether or not demagoguery contains truth or not, but it is an appeal to emotions rather than an appeal to truth in and of itself. Another concept is that people choose to believe in things that due to their biases. But again, what happens if your biases happen to be true? Again, it is a question of appeal, whether truth or your biases are the measure by which you decide, not whether things are true or not. But again, they can be true. So fake news can't be simply distilled to a question of biases or demagoguery. So what makes fake news work so often and so well? Is it simply the fact that half the people have biases that are simply false? Or that the people who use demagoguery tend to address people with falsehoods? Perhaps, but I think it is more than that. There is the saying that we all know, a lie can circle the world before truth finishes tying its shoelaces. And there is actually some merit to this claim. Simply put, once people believe something, they are less likely to change their mind. And people use truth to counter fake news. But which gets out first? The fake news. And truth is often used just to disprove it. But that makes the side of truth reactive rather than proactive. And by that time, it is a bit too late. So fake news gets out of the door first. Another concept is the concept of imagery, which will go to Donald Trump for a moment to discuss. Donald Trump likes giving people nicknames. Here are some of the nicknames Donald Trump has given some of his political rivals. Joe Biden became Sleepy Joe. Ted Cruz became Lying Ted. Jeb Bush became Low Energy Jeb. Chris Christie became Sloppy Chris Christie. And he's not above using the same moniker for multiple people. Crazy, he used to describe Liz Cheney, Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi, Bernie Sanders, and Maxine Waters. Lying, he used to describe Hillary Clinton, Ted Cruz, and James Comey. And he doesn't always land on one name for one person immediately. For instance, he gave Joe Biden 5 names, the same for James Comey, and he thus far has given 4 nicknames to Ron DeSantis. So what does this have to do with fake news? Some time back, I've read an interview with a researcher who said one of the strengths of fake news is that it creates an image, a mental image. So by giving people these nicknames, he reduces them to a single image, a flat image of being incompetent in some way or another. And if you think back, these nicknames feel very much like grade school. And it's no surprise. Kids know what works. If it didn't work, they wouldn't give other kids nicknames such as these, and these nicknames wouldn't hound some of these people for decades or of their lives or their entire lives. So it works. Let's look at some other examples. For instance, global warming had an image problem because people said that the world was getting hotter, and then we had snow in Texas, snow in other deserts. So is global warming real? If it's real, why is it sometimes colder than it has been for centuries? That is one of the reasons that the term global warming has been replaced by climate change. Or when there was Vietnam War, and the image of a naked girl running away impacted people all over the world. In general, images stay with us strongly. That was also why the chant of lock her up for Hillary Clinton was so powerful, because it created an image of her as a criminal, of her in a cell. It is a bit of a surprise that nobody kept bringing up the grab them by the pussy image for Donald Trump, but I guess it is because Trump's opponents do not have his tolerance for, well, grade school antics and tactics. Bringing us back to fake news, once an image is formed, it is hard to remove. That is the first issue with fake news and truth. And as we discussed, truth is reactive and fake news is proactive, so truth simply arrives too late. That is the first issue. The second issue, circling back to truth and fake news before imagery, is that some people, for instance Donald Trump, have simply made so many false claims that it is a full-time job just to disprove all of them. And unlike falsehoods, which you can simply make as you go along, in order to prove what is true and what is false, you have to actually make work, so it takes much longer. So by the time Donald Trump or whoever makes 100 falsehoods in one day, it will take a week for someone to disprove all of them, by which time they will have 700 more falsehoods to disprove. And even if you accept that a lot of what people say is simply false, that in and of itself is going to undermine the concept of truth, because you get to the point where you become skeptical of anything and everything anyone says. Now, perhaps skepticism has some value, but if we can't assume that people are genuine in what they say and wish to actually convey information by being truthful, then communication as a whole breaks down. Now, going back to the concept of imagery, let's take a look at Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. When Bill Clinton went out and said, "I did not have sex with that woman," what image comes to mind? Bill Clinton having sex with that woman. We can't have a negative image in our mind. If we say that something isn't true, then we still have an image of that thing. It's like saying to someone to not think about something. What do you think about when that happens? That thing. Furthermore, when you say something is false, it doesn't conjure any image. Let's say that we say the world is colder today than it ever was. We have an image in our mind of snowstorms. Now let's say someone tells us that is not true. What image do we have? We have an image of not having an image of snowstorms? Obviously, the opposite, that the world is hotter, can conjure images. And that actually brings us to what people should do. Instead of simply saying that something is false, you should try and conjure an image of how things are. Now, it doesn't always work, especially not with abstract concepts. Let's say you accuse one side of doing something in the budget, and it's false. What sort of image can you conjure? What do you say? How do you prove it? Making positive claims that something exists is simply more powerful than making a claim that something doesn't exist. And it seems that it is in part due to the concept of images that is there much more powerfully for positive claims. This, though, does present an option for enacting change and in moving people to follow a certain idea or movement. Instead of simply saying we are trying to remove prejudice or racism or what have you, you need to create an image of how things will look once that change comes to be. To dissuade fear, instead of telling people that what they fear isn't true or isn't going to happen, for instance, say that someone fears a nuclear war. They have a very strong image of a nuclear holocaust. What sort of image is there for there not being a nuclear holocaust? Maybe you try to create an image of peace talks in the UN, or for instance, for the concept of racism, you could use images of what the manifestation of racism look like, but I think it is also important to create an imagery of what a world without racism would look like. And this is an important part of science fiction and movies to help people imagine how the world would be once these changes happen. Not simply as a concept. Wouldn't it be great if there were world peace? But to conjure an image of people going across the world without having to stop for borders, of people of all creeds living side by side, you need to create a positive image of what you wish to convey, of what you wish to convince people to believe in. Imagery is a powerful tool, just like truth and falsehoods. And we should all use imagery to try and bring the world to a better place. Because truth as a tool is limited and in many ways weaker than falsehoods, for reasons that I've gone over earlier. And if people understand that and choose to abuse that, then we need to create new images to help steer the world into a better place. That image of how things could be, that dream of how things should be, is a 4-letter word, and that word is hope.